This session, we are happy to introduce Lisa is the CEO of the Infinite Metaverse Alliance, and she'll be speaking on avatar-focused open simulator projects. We have Lisa Laxton and Frank Ruloff. Frank is a senior systems engineer for the Thales company in the Netherlands. Welcome all. Let's begin the session. Over to you, Frank.
Thank you. And again, it's great to be here and to have this presentation together with Lisa. The subject for today is to talk a little bit about the projects that our both companies are doing to make OpenSim more attractive to a various large audience in the world. Next slide, please. So the first of a number of projects will go about grid audio. Next slide, please. As you all know, up until today, we use VFox as the VoIP over IP provider for OpenSim. Now, for our company, for Thales, to be dependent from a voice over IP provider that is not directly under our control is a difficult thing. So customers that we sell our products to want control. That's one reason to look at an alternative for VFox as a voice over IP. And in general, it is good to have multiple options in case one falls away. So the requirements are the same as for voice for VFox. We need spatial audio. It should be open source, and it should be integrated with OpenSim as much as possible. Next slide, please. Some years ago, there was a company called VCom that produced a voice over IP client for Murmur for OpenSim. They posted the software on the internet, and in between that, nothing really happens, except for I think a year ago, we asked VCom to help us with their software to make a voice over IP system. So that is the setup that we have currently. We have a Murmur voice over IP server that is connected with OpenSim. It will communicate with a module that replaces the SL voice module in the viewers, which is called Whisper. And it mimics the VFox interface and the SL voice interface as it is currently implemented in the viewer. It's not a very good solution because we would like to have a real integration of this audio source into the viewer, but at this moment, without major changes to the viewer, that is not possible. Next slide, please. So, Murmur, as Murmur or Mumble called, is open source voice over IP. It provides spatial audio. We have made changes to have better noise cancellation in the process. It is partial audio, and we can encrypt the audio streams. What does it mean? For us, it's important that, for instance, if we want to create a training environment, that, for instance, groups that do training do not hear each other. With partial audio, we can achieve that the two parcels that are besides each other will not hear each other audio. As I said, VCom in Switzerland did the initial job to create a possible instance for OpenSim. They worked together with us. They have their own modified OpenSim instance and also their own viewer, which is called Orla. And they used that for basic training and training in groups for quite some time now. And they helped us with setting this up and bringing it to life. Next slide, please. So where are we at the moment? Well, we have a system working with the voice over IP server running Ubuntu, and the clients are Windows 10 machines, and we tested that in a LAN configuration. What is going to be done yet is to test it on the internet. So look at performance issues to see what the performance will be if we run it on the general internet, and test the encryption of the audio streams. So we are quite far. IMA is using a lot of a lot of testing also in the cloud to see if that works. So the roadmap that we envisage for this application is, we currently only have clients that run on Windows 10. We want also to have clients that run on Apple and Linux. Mumble also has a text-to-speech and speech-to-text functionality, and we want to see what we can do with that. As I said before, the current solution to integrate it in the viewers is not what we really want. So we want to see if we can have a better integration into the future viewers, and also a better integration into OpenSim. Eventually, when we've done all the testing and everything, we will make the source code and documentation available for the wider audience to be used as open source. Next slide, please. Another project that we are working on, but is in very early stage, is an audio avatar. In our solution, in which we also want to use this for meetings and collaboration, we have as a company a lot of people that are traveling and only have say an iPad or a phone. Now, we saw some solutions before about how you can get the viewer on your phone or on the iPad, but we are also thinking of simple solutions where you have a viewer or a application on your iPhone that represents audio as an avatar only. That brings some problems with itself, like, okay, if you have an avatar, if you have an avatar that is, you cannot see on your phone what it's doing, there should be some support, some ways of communicating, putting the people in the right place, sharing the information that they are seeing in the meetings onto the phone. And that's the research that we are doing now. And yeah, the questions are, what info should be shared, and how are audio avatars represented in the virtual world? And what kind of interaction mechanisms should be available on the app on your phone to communicate with OpenSim and get a good view, not only for the person that is in the phone, but also for the other people that are in the meeting in OpenSim. Okay, next slide, please. One of the other projects that we are busy on is to have a remote desktop. If we have meetings or we use OpenSim in experimental stage in various ways in collaborating within our large company, and one of the things that we want to share is how do we get the information in world as easy as possible. For that purpose, we have created a web portal which is called OpenSim CMS, in which, for instance, somebody can put his PowerPoint presentation and then go into the virtual world, and you see the presenter application on the picture in the middle of the slide, and he can call up that PowerPoint presentation, and it will automatically be displayed on his screen, and with everything that's go around, like moving around. And that can be done for a PowerPoint presentation, it can be done for documents, it can be done for images, and spreadsheets, everything you want. We can also put movies on there, but one of the things that is impossible, you cannot always convert data that users want to show into a format that is be able to transfer within in the virtual world. So for that reason, we are busy to integrate the desktop into the virtual world so that we are able to show people each other's desktop if that would be necessary. Next slide, please. So what we did, and it was we recently started with this project again. So we had a solution that was based on screen share for the screen grabber, Red 5 as the video server, and the web portal, as I showed you before, to link it all together. So it works. So that's the current state. It works. And we were modifying the web portal to connect it all. But we also saw that the technology like screen share and Red 5 was not the most newest technology. So we switched to something like VNC. And we have that working, and we are still busy with finalizing the web portal to integrate this function into the web portal. There are some things like security that have to take into account, and we need to test it. Next slide, please. So how does it work? In fact, the user can create a group of avatars that is allowed to see the desktop in the web portal. You can imagine that somebody wants to share his desktop, but not everybody that goes into the world would be allowed, mostly for security reasons, to see what is on his desktop. So a user can create an event, as it is called, in this kind, a desktop event, and names all the avatars that want to be participating and be able to see the desktop. Then he starts his screen grabber, and the stream is registered in the web portal. And then using VNC distributed to the various viewers in the field. When the creator of the desktop sharer, the person that wants to share the desktop, wants to stop, he not only will stop the desktop sharing, but also the access rights of the people will be revoked so that nobody can use this information again. Also a reason for security. That was one of the things that came out of a number of investigations in which multiple companies shared information in OpenSim. And one of the things was they were very afraid of their IP, their intellectual property right. And so they want to make sure that when they shared something, it was all cleaned up when the meeting was finished. Okay, next. So one of the important aspects, and I highlighted that aspect last year in my presentation here, is the look and feel of the viewer. We see, and that has been more or less said by a lot of people during this conference, that the look and feel of the viewer is a little bit outdated. So the modern look of the viewer is something that we need. But there are things that are more of interest that we want to have. And this project is in a very early stage, and we are more or less defining the requirements for a new, totally different viewer than is currently around. So first of all, it should have a modern look and feel. It would use game engines and modern user interface packages. It should customizable and simplified on the user interface. What does it mean? It does mean that the viewer not only would be able to have the UI that is necessary to control OpenSim, but also customizable in the area of saying we add UE that is related to the things that you are doing inside the OpenSim. So for the purpose you use OpenSim for. So access of headsets, redesign the structure. So we look at the fact of integrating multiple voice over IP sources in the viewer without having to do very much and very difficult things. Access for tablets is something that we would like. Now we saw already an example in one of the previous presentations. Cloud rendering is one of the solutions. The only problem with that is cloud rendering is very expensive. We did a study for that, and it's doable. You saw in the previous presentations that it is doable. We already established also that it is doable. Only the cost of it is rather high, especially if you want to connect hundreds or maybe thousands of people. Installation issue, if you have a big company like us with maybe 40, 50,000 PCs all around the world, then installing a viewer is not a nice thing to do. So things like web-based viewers and looking at that is something that we want to take into account too. And last but not least is security. Even as a company as ours, that's partly a defense company, but not for a complete part, is security is getting more and more important. Our intranet is daily being attacked by the outside for whoever is doing that. That doesn't only apply to us, it does apply to a lot of companies that do the same. So security is one of the things that is important for this new viewer. Next slide, please. So what we want to do is we're creating a modular design of the viewer, and with use of a number of universities in the Netherlands, as well as students, we try to build up this framework and the flexibility that is in this framework. So one of the things, the first things that people as a university in the Netherlands is busy is the separation between a rendering machine and the rest of the application. So this would allow for the use of headsets, because the current viewers headsets are not really working because of the ever-changing frame rate, which makes some people sick. So there should be a split between the rendering application and the rest of the viewer. And this rendering application should, in our case, be whatever machine we want to attach to it. Then you see a number of plugins like voice, like user interface, and whatever plugins. Ways to add and change the viewer to the demands that you need. And last and not least, an interface to an OpenSim server. OES also different interfaces, but we want to make it adaptable to whatever OpenSim server variant that would be possible. So that is the general picture of the viewer that we going to produce. We are in a very, very early stage, and we are looking now at techniques to how to optimize this idea of having a different render application, which is based on game engines, and how to make this interface as flexible as possible so that you easily can integrate different render engines. So that is one of the things that has been started to look at. So we are very early stage with this, but we hope for the long term that we can have a very good basic viewer out of this. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Frank. That was just really compelling information. I feel very privileged to have IMA team with Thales Group. We've got a lot of stuff underway right now, so we're really just touching on the highlights. And thank you, Cynthia, for the great introduction. Thank you to Avicon and the OSCC folks for letting us present the information. Some of you know last year we put out a user survey, try to get information from the community as to what type of viewers they're using and what they use them for and what the different features are. And I posted that link in the chat because we have opened that for responses again. We have some responses have already begun, but we would really like to hear more from everyone so that each voice is heard. Now, when we looked at that, we said, okay, what are the use cases for the different types of users and what things were common? And we looked at the feedback we got from last year, and usability and accessibility improvements were pretty much all the way across the board. Everybody wants to see that. And in order to do that, server source code support is required. The caveat that we keep hearing for the last 5 or 6 years is that Linden Labs is preventing viewer dev teams from being able to make these changes and improvements. So that means dedicated to OpenSim is definitely something that needed to be done. Now, we took those use cases and we divided them out. And we said there were basically 3 use cases of our users. The new users who have never used virtual worlds before, obviously, they need a really simplified, easy-to-use viewer. These would be people like your students, casual users, prospects for employees who may be using a virtual environment to get oriented to a campus that they don't have security access to yet. So you have those typical onboarding issues we hear from educators throughout this conference about navigating, learning how to communicate, and learning how to customize your avatar and your environment. And that includes your user interface. Then case 2, which is the majority of OpenSim users, are the average end users. They go to virtual worlds, they go to events, they build, but they're really simulation activity focused and not really the advanced user. The advanced user is at case 3. Now, if we give case 2 too much information on their menus, they get information overload. So it's not always the case that you want to have the advanced and developer menus enabled by default. But in case 3, you would want to have those because these are common tools that they use. Now, when we said that, okay, we need to have some new viewers, we want to focus them on OpenSim, we like to work from a list of requirements. And so, number 1, all of the third-party viewers are open source and distributable. Most of them will work on all 3 of the major operating systems. And we also wanted to make sure they work with all the versions and derivatives to include the White Core Sim and the Halcyon folks. So when we looked at that and said, okay, now let's take it a step further. On those 2 issues that were for all use cases, which are accessibility and usability, what are the things that the users are telling us and that we know from our own testing? The Starlight CUI skin, which stands for, I believe, colorable user interface, is the one that has the greatest accessibility for people with visual and cognitive disabilities that need to make those changes for themselves. We want to put the hands in the power of the user and not have to worry about having an external application do that work for them. One of the things that was removed from a lot of the viewers was to hear voice equally from everyone. I still use Firestorm 5.0.1 because that is the last version that had that. As a hearing impaired user, I need to be able to turn that on when I am in a large group of people. This is also important for people who may have mobility issues and it's not easy for them to be able to double click on avatars when they're speaking to try to hear their voice. Murmur voice server selection, we wanted that option, and the key here, Frank touched on that, is that it is supposedly easy. We really need to do more research on that to integrate speech to text and text to speech services within the viewers because we are having our own viewers. We have 3 forks. One is based on Firestorm, one is based on Alchemy, and one is based on Singularity. We chose those because those are the viewers that most people are using based on the data that we collected. Now, on the usability side, this goes to the comments that people make to us as to what they think needs to be improved to make those viewers more usable. One of the big things that we heard about was the ability to dock your windows. If you had two displays and you could drag your windows over to the second display, you increase your 3D real estate on your screen for the scene. And this is really important for some of the more intense simulation and interactive environments. Another one that we found was camera. There are a lot of people who will alter their camera view from the default. And if you're in the gaming side of the house, you're used to looking behind your avatar, not looking down from the air at an angle on the top of your avatar. So our viewers, you will be able to change it back to what you're used to with Second Life, but we really want people, especially on the new users, to be able to look just over the right shoulder. So the camera defaults are going to be different in those viewers, and then adding some additional tools that may be developed for the viewers. And then finally, on usability, social media integration. Right now, some of them do integrate with Flickr and Facebook, but this is not what we're talking about on social media. We're talking more about the work that Hyacinth Landry has been doing. She and I have been talking a lot about that, and I know there are a couple of other people now involved in going into the federated web space because G+ is going away, and a lot of OpenSim users are in G+. We wanted to be able to provide something that made it easier for you to use social media with OpenSim. And so one of the things that she has done is allowed you to, when you take your screenshot, your snapshot in your environment, you don't have to download that and upload it to social media. If you use an integrated solution, you then have a shared folder in your inventory, and you can just drag that snapshot into your shared folder, and it is immediately available in your Friendica account, which is a social media platform, and then you just, go and share the post. It's very easy. So that saves the users a lot of time. Another thing that she has done, I've tested it on a development node she's using now, is to, without using an email address, to actually use my avatar's address. So I use my Third Rock avatar to create an account. I then was sent my credentials via IM to my avatar. And I also saw that because offline messages were enabled on that account, so I saw it in email as well. I was then able to log in. So now if someone on that node is sharing something in OpenSim, I will get a message in my avatar's account. I'll get an instant message saying that Hyacinth shared something, and I can just immediately go look at it. I don't have to have all of these other notifications enabled on my desktop to know that, oh, yeah, I got to go check my email, I got to go open, I got to log into G+, whatever. We want to make this work seamlessly together. And having something like Friendica, which is open source, and a friendly development team that is welcoming OpenSim to their circle. They have asked us or told us that they would be very happy to have a test team go through their software and let them know what needs to be fixed, what new features need to be added, and to work with them to try to make it more compatible with OpenSim. So we think that's an important thing. And you notice at the bottom of this slide, I also included a comment about that user survey. I really do encourage everyone to let us know what you think. So I know that was a lot of information, so I'm going to break it down a little bit for you in our team project. We divided this up into 3 umbrella projects. One is called Helios, one is called Selene, and one is called Eos. Those of you who are familiar with mythology, you may find there is some correlation to that. I have some information in G+ about why we chose those names. Now, Project Selene really represents travel and the hypergrid. So any projects that are associated with that will go under that umbrella project. And one of them is Dreamgate. This is a Firestorm fork that's really targeting that advanced user, use case 3. And we also have a script repository that all of the scripts that we've been working on over the last year or two are Creative Commons are going to be added to that repository, where we've created a Bitbucket account so that anyone will be able to download from that library. We've also included a couple of other common libraries with scripts that have been donated to the public domain. And I just talked about the social media integration. That would fall under the Project Selene. Now, under Project EOS, this is really representing more of the simplified client and potentially web-based access, like Frank talked about. SceneGate is a fork of Alchemy, and it's really geared towards the majority of OpenSim users. Edugate is what we want to call the Singularity version. Now, Frank and his organization, they have done a very simple implementation of Singularity. We have that available. We'd like some people to test that. It is in our Bitbucket. And we're going to do one more version of that based on some of the testing that we've done so far. We know there are a couple of things that need to be added back in, and Frank and I have already agreed on that. WebGate is probably going to be the name for a web-based viewer that we would like to put together and make that available to the community. Now, on the server side, as I mentioned, we're going to have server support, which means we need to be able to have control over that code during the research and development. So Helios is where anything that's associated with server-side work, any modules that might need to be created, are going to happen. And we want the IMA box, which is an extension of the Moses in a Box project, to be platform agnostic. We want it to have the ability that someone can say, okay, I'm going to fire up an IMA box, and I'm going to connect to this Metaverse Depot grid, which is our R&D grid, and it will be truly plug and play. And that is in development. We've had some success with it so far. We're going to continue that. Now, on the test grid side, we have several test grids that are set up. One is running 09, one is running 0821, and one will be running a newer version of 083, which will have the modules and some fixes that were not rolled into OpenSim in the past few years. And of course, now all of that is really geared towards supporting the existing community. Every end user out there, from entertainers all the way to instructors, educators, trainers, we want to support everybody. And we know that there's immediate things that need to be done to do that. So that's part of our focus. But all of that is really a basis for a future project, which is to begin work towards the next generation of virtual world platform. The source code needs to be modernized. It needs to really be looked at for more of a cloud-based architecture philosophy. We need to look at industry standards, coding standards, fully documented, proper APIs, so that we can attract other software application providers to utilize OpenSim and to be able to easily integrate with them. So, research and development, that's really a lot about what we're doing. And as I mentioned, everything is based on requirements. We would like to achieve platform agnostic goals. We know that's not always going to be totally possible, but we'll do the best we can to try to be there. One of the requirements that we hear from the industry side of the house is simulator segregation, where one simulator, what happens there, we don't want it to impact the rest of the grid, and also from a security perspective. Now, the machine virtualization is something that really applies on the cloud side and virtual machines. to try and increase the parameters for performance. And then we also heard from, especially on the education side, they don't necessarily have the technical skills to be an administrator, and they want this to be something they can use very quickly without a whole lot of budget that needs to be set aside for technical administration. And in a lot of cases, they're using students to do their administration. So it really needs to be as non-technical as possible. I already mentioned the coding standards, industry standards, compliance, and why those are important. But finally, a predictable roadmap. When we talk with IT departments, they tell us that they won't touch an open source project that does not have a predictable roadmap, because then it's very difficult for them to fit that into the processes and procedures that they have available to them. So that means we have to have a roadmap. And that roadmap, this is a very broad overview type roadmap here, was to build upon some prior documented research. We are doing that. To begin with the last stable release of OpenSimulator on the advice of IT departments, to conduct some very extensive testing to identify and resolve any issues that may still exist with that, to develop a template VM, one that people can say, oh, use this hypervisor, install this image, and fire it up. You're ready to go. We have done that. The template has been done. Jamisa, I give him credit for that. It was a great job. And we are also securing the depot grid. We have Seth Nygaard is now working with us, looking at that and hosting some of our test grids. Now, when we implement a production grid plan, the depot grid is a project in itself, because we want to be able to monitor traffic, do load testing through that depot grid, and have it serve as a portal to the hypergrid. This will come up with some new things we'll be offering for free to other grids out there and particular users as well. Now, all of this needs to be coordinated, and it has to be coordinated with a team. So we put together an IMA development team, and we are going to invite more people into that as soon as the repositories go from private to public status. But overall, to take this engineering approach, we need to make sure we have adequate system design, which currently is not there in all the documentation that we can find. So we'll need to do a system design of OpenSim as it is today, and that will help provide a basis for a system design for that next generation of virtual software. In order to do all of that, we've got to do documentation, and everybody that's in this crowd here knows very well that documentation is a major issue. We have come up with a plan we think may help get a lot of that documentation done. And finally, we want to have really good regression testing for the project. And we're not isolating from other versions of OpenSim. We are testing other versions. We would like to help. And this will all be public repository information, so any work that we do is available to the other development teams. Now, when I talk about the depot grid, this is really just a concept diagram. But basically, the way it works is we have 4 VMs that are currently running on the server. The first virtual machine is running robust and all of the grid services. The second VM is serving several regions. The third VM is serving several regions. And the fourth is serving several regions. We had a 5th VM, which was remote, was connected. And Jamisa can tell you more about his experience on that. What we're doing right now, the CPU allocation is fine within the virtualized environment, but the memory allocation is sort of guesswork as we go through and do some testing. So we're doing that now. But whatever happens on one particular virtual machine does not impact the other. and so the grid performance is actually pretty stable. This grid has been up since, I believe, April or May of this year. And we've definitely done a lot of testing. We're doing some massaging now and securing the grid itself before we open it up to just about any user who would want to register. Right now, registration is by approval only, so that we can limit the variables in our research. Are there any questions? I noticed a comment from Krista. Thank you. That would be very much appreciated.
We do have some questions, Lisa. Let's see. Marcus opened with, have you considered using WebRTC for screen sharing? It can use open codes that almost any browser can support at good quality or very low latency. And I'll put that in the chat log too.
Hey, Frank, you want to address that one?
Yeah, well, we have looked at that sort. We have looked at that sort of technology, and yes, it is a candidate. We did not choose for that because we already had something running there, and yeah, it's definitely also something to consider. Yes.
Thank you. And from Kaylee, we had a question: will any of this be available for Second Life also?
In terms of the viewer, is that what your question is?
It'll take her a moment to hear it. So let's see, there is a comment, just so you saw. Kudos for your conscientious approach from JJ Edenverse Drinkwater. I'll let Kaylee answer that in the chat. And while Kaylee is providing that to you, let's go to our next question from Serene Huntress. If you want to support everybody, does that include low-income people with older or higher-end computers?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Yes, certainly.
Yeah, and I see that Kaylee typed a yes. With regards to compatibility with Second Life, we would love to maintain that compatibility. And our focus is to meet the needs of the OpenSim community. If the viewers still if they will still connect to Second Life, great. We would love for people to do that. But we really have no control over the direction that Linden Labs takes.
So, may I say something?
Sure.
Yeah, well, one thing is to integrate it into the viewer to having two, but if it gets too difficult, well, you still might have two viewers, one for OpenSim and one for Second Life. Mm-hmm. It's not that difficult to have two viewers on your computer if you want to.
Right. And I wanted to address the question about low-end computers. This is definitely something that we keep it in mind, not only just for the people with low income, but you have small businesses who really don't have a lot of money to buy high-end computers for their employees. You have government agencies who are still running very, very old systems, especially in remote locations. You have universities, public school systems. A lot of them have low-end systems. So it's important that we do test on low-end systems, and I do that. And I'm sure that Frank can attest to the variations in the IT requirements that his company has.
Yes. Well, we are not a small company, of course. We are a very large company, but the most problematic things that we have is the fact that when we set up, we started with Second Life. To start our research to use this technology. And the first thing that happened is after we had a successful, because we had a private island in Second Life to do these all kind of things. But the first thing what happened was that our colleagues from the UK were forbidden to use it because of security reasons. And that's one thread that comes through all of the things we're doing. We set up a number of experiments that involved Thales companies in Italy, in Germany, and every time it was not done because of security. And that is one major aspect of it. So looking at viewers, we thought we had a little discussion with the core devs yesterday about it. With regard to the viewers, but also OpenSim, you need technologies that will convince the IT departments that they can install and work with these things. That is important. So the technology that is used in the viewers and in the servers should comply to modern security standards. Otherwise, they will not be accepted.
Exactly. And you know, that's why it's key that we do focus on industry standards compliance, not just for security, but also for accessibility. In the United States, we have a feature called 508 compliance, and it's a regulation that every publicly funded university or school, as well as all public agencies with the government, must comply with. And this is really covered very well under W3C, which is our web standards, but it is not something that was applied to the viewer design when Linden Labs originally made the Second Life viewer. The other thing that is not compliant are usability guidelines. The best we could find in terms of available skins was that Starlight Kui skin for the viewers, which is the reason we have initially selected that. We may end up getting people who want to contribute come up with a better skin. That's great. One of the questions that I saw in here when I was reading back through the chat was, how was this going to be maintained and upgraded for both the medium and a long run? That's a great question. We have a Bitbucket set up. These projects are open source. We want to make sure that everyone who wants to participate can do that, and we'll maintain the open source project. This will be something that is part of IMA's mission to advance the virtual world technologies. What we would like to do to make sure that the development is sustainable is to actually go after some grant monies that will provide the funding necessary to keep the development sustained, but we may also look into a bounty type system for the developers, because developers do a lot of good work and they need to be paid. We can't always come up with, money to pay them like a large company can, but we can certainly champion the project, and that's something that we want to do.
I saw a question from Steve. Is any of the Thales project going to be open source? Yes. What we do with these projects is in fact saying what other companies do in open source. We like open source. We use open source, so we want to contribute back to open source. The contribution here will be, for instance, the voice over IP part that has been developed by us. We paid VCOM to do it, but it will be open source. We did an update to the LSL editor in the past so that it will run with also the OpenSim primitives and have some nice additional features. So yes, we will contribute back. In the end, of course, we want to use it to put in our products and to sell it. That's of course one of the reasons that we're doing it, but we will certainly put things back in open source.
Okay, thanks, Frank. I wanted to address Krista's question, who is funding me? No one is funding me. My company, as well as Selby Evans, who is a contributor to IMA as a partner, we are funding the projects for the IMA since its inception and for the future. There is another question here. The perspective relating to security, both from a server side or the viewer side. I believe it's both. Wouldn't you say, Frank?
Yes, I think it's both. It's
Yes.
the communication between the simulator and the viewer, but also the way the viewer and the simulator internally are built.
There were two more questions, just so you know. We had Art Blue asked, does a viewer version exit where you can customize the starting page so it looks really made for this project? And then there's a second part to the question.
When we talked about user interface customizable, has to do with also the man-machine interface. So now if you look at the viewer, you have all the buttons and things to be able to control the viewer in OpenSim to build, to do things. Now, first of all, you want to have this whole set of interfaces to be minimized for people that only want to access OpenSim and don't do anything else. But furthermore, suppose that you run something in OpenSim and you want to add certain buttons on your user interface to control what you're doing in OpenSim. So it's more than only the front page. It's also actually the buttons, the drop-down menus, everything that you want to make it customizable. Not only for using OpenSim, but also in combination with what OpenSim is doing in that certain perspective. In that way, it looks a little bit like what Christina has done with her viewer, except adding new functionality in the sense that you can also add menus that go into the virtual world and control the things that you have used the OpenSim for.
Right. And one of the things that we've talked about at some of the IMA meetings would be that it might be a really good goal to make the viewers white label so that a particular school system may want to put their own look on it, have their own skin that is really geared towards what they want to do. So it kind of fits in together with what Frank has talked about and the work that Krista did with Onlook and in Citra.
I had another question. I see, do you have particular universities in the Netherlands who may be able to work with our institution on some aspects? It could be, but we're working with the universities, and the universities themselves more or less determine what they want to do. But I would be glad to make a connection and see if the universities are also willing to work with your institutions.
And I noticed that Lear copied Chris's comment. I thought I mentioned that before. I very much welcome anything that you want to contribute. So, Krista, I'd love to get together with you about what you have to bootstrap the documentation effort.
Well, on that note, let me get back to the other. I want to thank our presenters. Thank you, Lisa and Frank, for a terrific presentation.